So I was looking for a simple database that I could use for my students to learn how to use some database functions, how to write an application that talks to a database, that type of thing. And SQL Server that I've used extensively in the past simply didn't have those options, in that it was too difficult to configure and therefore just not adequate for what we needed to do. And so MySQL is much easier to use, and if you take some computer science courses, your professors will have you load MySQL and do some work with that too. But that didn't really work for me either. And so what I needed was something that was portable and yet allowed people to write code to it, and would work really well. So anyways, I stumbled across SQLite. In my experience, I hadn't had to do any real portable databases in the past, so I had heard of it but never used it. So I decided to go ahead and take a look at it and write a little video for you guys to know how to install it. My concentration isn't on SQLite itself. I'm not a professional with this. I only stumbled on this earlier this week. My intention here is just to show how to download it and then how to write some code to communicate with it. That's all. Okay, so you want to go to this link, and then you're looking for this version 3.11.2, and then you want to scroll down to right here, the DB browser for SQLite Win64 MSI standard installer, unless of course you need the 32. So once you've downloaded it, you'll of course get this little thing here, and you want to go ahead and open it up. Click Next. Of course, accept the terms. Click Next again. And this all depends on if you want to install this stuff. I think I do for right now. Of course, your extension, your path. Yep, I want to do all this, and no, I don't want that. So go ahead and click Next and install. Once you get here, go ahead and click Finish. You'll notice your little shortcut. Go ahead and click on that, and that will bring up the SQL browser, the DB browser, SQLite. And from here it's pretty straightforward. We want to go to the new database. Go ahead and click on that. Let's go ahead and click just to the desktop. And let's say we're going to make this one just a testing database. We'll call it testing. Okay, so this will come up, and we're ready to create a table. I prefer to work in the code section, so that's just kind of how I like doing it. So we can actually just start writing our code right here, and so I'll write. Go ahead and create table. As soon as I get this, okay, so I have to write in here 1 minute. Let's see, table. I'm not sure. We'll call it T1. Okay. And 1 minute here as I figure out how to use the editor key, because it's generated in the SQL code, but I actually would rather just write the SQL code myself. So I think, oh yeah, okay, so let's cancel out of this. We need to go to the execute SQL. This is best. This is where we want to be. Okay, so here I can write my own code and say, okay, I want to create, and I'm going to create table T1. And so yes, there's the wizards for people that like wizards. I'm not a wizard guy, so not my thing. So I always start with what I call the object ID, and in this case I'll do it like that. It's going to be an integer, so this will come up right away. We can just say integer, and it's going to be primary key. If you don't know the database terminology, I'll have separate videos to talk about Pure Database. This video isn't about Pure Database. This video is about how to set up SQLite and how to connect with it using code. Alright, so moving forward with this, we're going to use auto increment. If you've worked with MS Access, you'll recognize the auto increment from MS Access. It's not a thing in SQL Server. For those of you that have worked in SQL Server, your stronger databases. Usually in SQL Server or in other databases is going to be an identity. So it would be integer primary key, and there would be identity, and then you would feed it. You would seed it 1, 1, meaning it's going to start at 1 and it's going to increment by 1. But SQLite, being much more basic, it's just an auto increment, very similar to MS Access. Okay, so let's create our first field, and I'm just going to write, we'll do a simple name one, so let's say first name or something like that. So first name, and first name, SQLite is really simple, so it just has the data types, or there's not too many data types, so there is no nvarchar or varchar, it's just text. Okay, well that makes things pretty simple. Last name, first it's going to be text also. And let's do age just for fun. And age is going to be int. I can spell. Okay, so that looks good. And this is just we'll keep things really simple. We're just creating one table, and rather than calling it T1, let's go ahead and just call it table person. I guess makes sense. So we're going to create table person. It's going to have this object ID as a unique identifier. It's going to be the primary key. It's going to auto increment 1 by 1, and it cannot be null. There's always needs to be 1. Okay. First name is going to be text. Last name is going to be text, and age is going to be integer. All right, let's run this and see what happens. Okay, we get the message down here. The query executed successfully, and it's good. We have our table. So let's go ahead and take a look at the database structure. Here's table person that we just created. If we open it up, and here's our object ID, our first name, last name, and age. Now the really cool part is, if your database is really this simple, and for our testing purposes, it's going to be this simple. It's just a simple little table with some information. You're done at this point. You're done. Yes, you can browse data from here, you can do all sorts of things, but we're not interested in any of this. We're only interested in creating this database so that we can write to it with code and exploit its portability, because that's what we really want, is for this thing to be portable. That's what we want. So we have that now. As you notice, we can also write views and triggers. SQLite is pretty powerful. There's a lot of good documentation on it, and if you want to do a lot more with it, there's a lot more things you can do with it. It's very powerful. Of course, like all the documentation will tell you, it's not good for being networked. It's not good for multiple users. It's just not meant for that type of thing. But if you need something to track your data, and it's maybe in a mobile app, or for our purposes where we're just practicing coding, and we want to write code to a simple database container that's portable, so we can move it from the lab computer to our home systems to our laptops without reconfiguring anything, then this is the ticket. This is the pretty good one. All right. So let's save the project. And what I'm going to do is, on the desktop, we're going to create a new folder here for this, and we're just going to call it DB testing, like that. DB testing. Okay. And inside of DB testing, we're going to have this project, this database. Okay, we are done. We can close this up. Do you want to save changes? Yes, we do. So at this point, we're done with the DB browser. Within our folder now, we have a portable database. Well, it should be in here. One moment, and I'll see where it actually went. Okay, I just accidentally saved it to my desktop, but here it is. So we have the testing database that we just created. We have the DB project. So if you wanted to, you could go back to your SQLite browser, open it up, and say, I want to connect, I want to open to this database. It's just going to say, where's it at? It's on my desktop. It's in the DB testing, there it is. Open it up. We're here. We have our table we created with our, so it's all there. It's exactly what we want. We are good to go. Okay, so we can get out of this now. And at the end of the day, this was the goal, was to have our .db file in a little folder here. And this is now fully portable. It doesn't require any configuration anywhere else. I can put this on a USB key. I can take it to the lab. I can work on it wherever I want to now. You would have to configure the browser if you're going to work within the browser. But we're not going to be doing that. We just used that to create our little database to get started with. Okay. So next we're going to be opening the SQL Server and taking a look at that now. Or I mean Visual Studio. So now we're back in Microsoft Visual Studio. We're going to click on File, go to New, Project. I'm going to work in C# just because I like C# and it's easier to work with. So we're going to do this little, let's see, DB, I'm going to call it SQLite, and I'll just call it test. I'm not going to create a directory because I don't want to save this. Okay. And okay, so we recognize our old console here. We have to do a couple of things before this is ready to go, and the first thing we need to do is we need to go to the Solution Explorer, and we want to go to SQLite test here. We want to go to the let's see, Manage NuGet Packages. You want to go to this, click on it, and we're going to go to the Browse, and you want to type in I'll just type in SQLite and it should come right up. And it does. It's the very first one. This is what you want, system.data.SQLite. Go ahead and click on that. We're going to install it. This little window right here will pop up, and so just click OK. I accept. And that's it. It's done. We can close this window. Get back to this. Now, the other thing you need to do is you need to come here, back to your using, and say you're going to be using it. So now we have to reference it. So we'll say system using dot data, and now SQLite will pop up. This is here now because we added it. So now it's there. It's an option. We can now use the components of SQLite. So great. At this point, you're ready to start coding and talking to your database. So one of the first things that I do is I create a separate class that, for my database functions, and I usually name it the database class, and it just holds all my database functions. It's usually not part of the main program. For simplicity, we could do it here, but I'm going to go ahead and do it the way I usually do it and just make my class. So one more thing, and this is just for people that are getting started. Usually, I will do this comment section here, and I'll do something along these lines, and just to reference, who I am and what I'm doing. So today's I think the 12th. Hello. Of course, my key stopped working. And I like to put what this does, so we'll just call it SQLite console testing app. Sounds good. And this one here is going to be the main functions, so I'll just use main, that'll work. That's usually what I do to start off with. And next thing we need to do is to go ahead and create our database class. Let's go to Add, New Item. We're going to add a class, and we're going to name that. I usually just name it database something or other. but just so that I don't get this confused with anything else, we'll say database class light. I think that works. And we'll just add it. Okay. Usually what I do is I'll go back here, I'll copy my little comments section, go back to here, cut and paste it in. But here I'm going to want to write, change what this part here is. This is doing, this is the database functions. Database class with functions. So I know at a glance what this is. It's, you know, all handy dandy. Okay, I'm going to write some code and then I'll explain what. So what I did is I just wrote a couple lines of code. I wrote the first class, which is going to be the public static SQLite connection. This is just a reserved keyword for SQLite. Create connection, which is just what all this is something that I'm going to name it. I'm going to create the connection string here in this function, and I'm going to call it SQLite connection CS. This right here is red because I haven't assigned it to anything yet, which I'm going to. But first I want to do a little bit of cleanup. We don't need most of any of this stuff right here, so let's go ahead and get rid of all of this that we're not going to use. We're not going to use any of this right here. So let's get rid of that. Might use the system. We'll take a look at it when we're done. But for what I did have to add, it didn't come defaulted, was the system.data.SQLite. If you recall, that's the same reference that we had to add over here in our main. We need it here in our database class also, because we're going to be referencing it, obviously, since this is the database class. Okay, so another thing that I'll do is usually I'll usually try to comment and say, okay, so what's going on here? Well, this is going to be the class that's going to find the current directory, and I do this because otherwise you have to keep track of your directory path, and so this just makes it a lot easier than it would be if I had to assign it all the time. And so I'm also going to make a note here for myself, should I choose to mess with this later on, that it's going to be in a certain path. So I'll write a little bit more code and then I'll explain. Well, it dawned on me that we need to know where everything's located first. So let's go to the Solution Explorer, right click on your solution, go to the Open Folder and File Explorer. Your little window will come up, it'll tell you where everything's located. So this right now is located in my repos, section for my source code, and it's right here. You can see this. So I'm going to go ahead and double click in here, and I want to go all the way to the bin directory. And because inside of this debug, this whole section of code right here is very important. This is where my stuff is going to be hidden, and I have to cite this code for my directory string. So I'm going to copy that and then and close it. But I needed to know where it was at first exactly. So now we know this, and we can start coding for it. Again, I'll write a little bit of code and I'll come back. So there was one more thing I need to do too before I get to the coding part, is going back to our open folder and file location and back to where we were at. This is just something that I like to do. I like to create a folder in here where the actual database is going to be kept. And so if I had created a directory, this would have been a lot cleaner, but since I didn't, I'm going to have to do it in here, and that's fine. So I'll just click New, and we'll do the folder option, and I'm going to just click DB, and inside of this DB is where I'm going to actually copy or move, it doesn't really matter what you do, my DB. And so I'm going to put my database in there. I'll do copy. And so now the database I created is now in this directory. It's in my repos in the DB-Lite test directory, and it's right here. So with all the other stuff that I'm doing, there's going to be this little directory with the database actually in it. And that's going to be really, really handy for accessing it. And for making it portable, because it's all going to be inside of this one folder. Okay, so I added a couple lines of code and moved things a little bit farther along. So we have our SQLite connection, which is a reserved keyword saying that SC is going to be the SQLite connection, so SC. The next thing I do is I say, okay, I'm going to find the directory, and the directory is going to be in the, and I don't know where the directory is going to be, so I'm going to look for it. So I say, okay, the string, and this one is different from SC. This is, I just named it CS. I don't know why. So the connection string, because this is SQL connection, this is connection string. So CS for connection string is going to equal the system.io.directory.get current directory. I want to know where the current directory is. This is going to tell me where the executable is located. And what I can do is, at this point right here, I can say, okay, let's see what that looks like. And this is usually exactly what I do. I'm going to find out what it's outputting because I don't know. So we're going to find out. So let's take a look. All right, so this function, if called, is going to get the current directory of where the executable is located, and I'm going to print it out to the console. So in order to do this, though, I need to call this function. So we're going to go back to the program, and we're going to paste it here, and we're going to run this thing. And can't just do that. We have to tell it where this is located, and so it is located in the database class underscore SQLite dot class, and there it is. So now we can run this, and here it comes. This is located in the users, Bobby, sources, repos, DB, light, test, bin, debug. Okay, now I need to know what this is because this is going. I'm going to use this to help parse to help set my my database string and tell the system where the database is, because the database isn't located here. The executable is located here, but I didn't put my database here. Remember, I removed it. Now, had I put my database here, that would work just fine, but for organization, I don't want to put it there. Okay, so let's move this out of the way, go back to our database class, and now what I can do is I can write some other code that's going to be very helpful, and I'll just use the reserved keywords replace, and we'll replace part of the string to create our true connection string. Okay, so let's do that. So CS is going to equal cs.replace, not remove, replace. And we're going to replace, I'm going to go ahead and use the ampersand, which the ampersand, for those of you that don't know, all it means is that the string is going to be a literal string, so that way I don't have any problems with my backward slashes, because this is going to be something along these lines, a backward slash. And so I'm going to replace, let's take a look where I'm at. Not that directory, let's see, this one here. So I'm going to replace, let's see, right? Now since the directory, get current directory, showed me the path to the executable, all I had to do is take that path, which I already showed you, and then replace the part that said bin debug, and replace it with where I put the database. And I put the database in its new directory in db testing db. So by replacing this part right here in the connection string, we get the real connection string. So if I run this, it's going to output this connection string right here. And if I grab the folder to see where it's actually located, you can see that that's exactly where it's at. Sources, source, repos, db light test, db testing, db, and there it is. Now, all of this is case sensitive, so if you could put an uppercase B or an uppercase or a lowercase t for testing, this won't work. It has to be exact. So all you need to do, like I showed you, is use your console right here to look at your output, and then just adjust this right here, your string, until your output is exactly matched to the true directory of wherever you put things. And then once you've done that, you won't have to do this again. The system, once you'll move your database around from a USB key to like I said, your lab system to your workstation, and it'll always know exactly where it's at, because it's going to grab the directory and then adjust it to wherever your database is, and as long as you placed your database in this DB directory that you created. So it's just really handy to do it this way, at least in my opinion. Other people might not think so. But okay, so let's close out of that. We have our directory. We don't need this anymore. And now we'll start working on our select statement so we can actually communicate with our database. Okay, so I added a little bit of code to the to this function before we work on the select thing, and I went ahead and put a try catch statement in. And the reason I did that is because I want to try and open the database. And so if the connection string is right, then it'll open the database. And if it doesn't, then the catch statement's going to there'll be an exception thrown which is caught, and I'll write to the console statement some hard-coded code. Now this is something that I like to do. I like to say where the error is happening. So in this case, the error is happening in the database underscore SQLite.creationConnection method. There's an error, and then I like to output the actual message, so I know, okay, what exactly is the message that was output. But this part right here, as you write several functions, it'll tell you what function you have a problem with, so you can go directly there and debug if that's the case. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and run this and see what happens. Okay, so it failed. It says invalid connection string. So it shows me the connection string, which is exactly right. This is it. This is where the database is at, exactly named. But because of outputting the error, it tells me no equal sign found. Okay, so I know what the issue is. Yes, I did parse it correctly to get the true path. However, I didn't format it properly, and so we need to do that right now. So we're going to do that. So all I need to do is to say data source. I'm having a hard time coding today. Is equal, and then we're going to concatenate CS. All right. So what this is going to do is this is going to say the data source is equal to the connection string that we generated here, and then that whole thing is going to be passed on to as the connection string to the SQLite connection object here, and then we're going to try and open it. So if everything works, it should just work. So we'll do that. Oh, and here we go. So we run it, and it says press any key to continue. This is a good sign. This tells me that the code went through everything. We generated the proper connection string. It worked. We opened it, and we didn't have any problems opening it. And we returned this back to the program main, which doesn't do anything with it. And we're good. So now we know that we can talk to our database. That's what this little test is. So we really didn't do too much. All we did was format our connection string and try and open it. That sends us back to the program here. But it tells us a lot. We did very little, and we found out that we can communicate with our little database. So that's really good news. Now we're ready to do more work with our database. So again, let's go back to our database class. And the very next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and create a select statement to pull out information from our database. All right, so I wrote a little bit of code. What I did is I created our class, which is going to be select class. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, I want to select the object ID, the first name, the last name, and the age as age. And the reason I did this is because age is kept as an int, and I want to go ahead and cast it as an int. If there's any weird values or something, I want to go ahead and cast those and move those to age, cast them as age. So cast them as an int, and then name them as age. And I'm pulling this from person. So this is just a SQL statement. Select your column names from your table. That's what I'm doing here. Now, if you don't want all your column names, you would only select the ones that you want. In this case, this is what I'm doing. I went ahead and created some variables. So string fn is going to be for my first name, ln is going to be for my last name, and age and object ID are both here also. Okay. So the next thing you'll see is the SQLite data reader and the SQLite command. And so you got to have those things in order to make all this work. So the SQLite, all I do is I'm declaring some variables. The SQLR is the SQLite reader, and the SQLite underscore CMD is the command. And then I create the command here, and then I'm going to create some command text, which is going to be the query. So this query is going to be Q. So select command.command text is going to equal Q, which is this query. So that's what all this does. You got to have it. And then once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and execute the reader. And that just means that it's going to talk to the database and run this select statement against the database. That's what the execute reader means. Once that information comes back, it's going to be populated into the SQLR. So it's going to execute this SQL statement, get the information, populate into SQLR, into the reader. And next thing I need to do is I need to create a loop, and I'll use a while loop, which is standard. Almost everybody uses these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the information out of the reader, and that is what I'm going to do. So I'll write a little bit more code, and then I'll be back. Okay, so what I did here is I created our little while loop, and what I do is I iterate through the different information in the SQL reader. And so I'm going to assign that information that's in the SQL reader, which you can all tell because it's SQL reader, object ID, SQL reader, first name, SQL reader, last name. Whatever it pulled out of the database is what went into the SQL reader. And so when you see this SQLR right here, 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 and here, that's the reader, and it's pulling out these column names that we pulled out in the select statement. So the select statement fed into the SQL reader, and that happened right here in the execute reader. SQL reader was populated with that information, and then right here in the while loop we're pulling out the information that was populated in there when it talked to the database. And when we pull it out, we're also assigning it to the variables that we created right here, and we're assigning it to these variables so that we can use those variables to do something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assign all this information into a string, and then I'm going to output the string. Right now this doesn't really do anything. It just talks to the database and pulls some information out. Alright, so what I do is I added line 61, and what I do is I take the variable s, the string up here, and I use it right here to concatenate the different information that was pulled out. So I'm going to concatenate the string object ID, so something I hard coded, to the variable, whatever was pulled out from right here, object ID, and then I'm going to say, okay, now I want, let's better give this a space, I want to say, okay, first name, whatever that is, and then I'm going to concatenate the variable first name that it pulled out from the database. Then I'm going to concatenate last name, the string last name, with the variable last name, what was pulled out, and then again concatenate the string age with the actual variable age that was pulled out right here and parsed. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a return so that when this iterates through the next time, the next string will be constructed in a separate line, because I want this to read the way a person would read it, line by line, with the information taken out of the database. And so that's how you do this. Now if this fails, if there's a fail in here in this try, something goes wrong, the exception will be caught, and then S will forget its original intention of getting data and just simply send out a new piece of information, which is to let me know that there was an error in the select data function, and then to actually send me that error so I know what's going on. So this select statement is now done. This should work. There's nothing in our database, so if we were to, well, there's some more things we need to do. If we were to run it, nothing would happen. But let's save it, because now we have our select. And over here, we need to do a few things over here now to make this work. So right now it's simply calling the create connection string, but it's not doing anything with it. So we need to do something with it. And so we're going to go ahead and do some stuff with it. Okay, so this is going to now assign it to SC for our SQL connection string. It's going to return it. It's going to get the connection string and then return it so we can use it over here. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to pass that connection string that we just retrieved to another function. So now I want to write, I'm going to say, okay, console, and I'm going to write, I'm going to call the next function, which is database light, and I'm going to call the select data that we just now created, and now this will work. So we're going to write the database function from database, the class database underscore SQLite, and we're going to use that function select underscore data that we just wrote. We're going to pass it the SQL connection string that we derived from here. We're going to pass it here. We go back to here, and so the connection string was derived here, and now we're going to pass it to the select statement to retrieve this information. Right now, if we run this, nothing will happen because we don't have anything in the database. The database is empty. So this comes up and just says press any key to continue. There's nothing really to do. So I mean that's good. We can do something else here. Sometimes I'll put a try-catch statement and say, hey, this completed successfully, and that's fine. But I want to keep this really basic so that people can understand what's going on. I'm not doing any validation or any of that kind of stuff in this little program. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an insert statement so that we can actually insert some information into our database and then see it actually working. And so I'm back in the database underscore SQLite class, and we're going to go ahead and write our insert statement. So I'm going to write some code. I'll be right back. What I did now was I went ahead and created the insert data statement. So I take some arguments. So the string arguments is going to be for FN for first name, LN, age, and I want the SQL connection so that I can do some work. Next, I take a string. I'm going to call it I this time, and in that string I'm going to write the SQL statement. So the SQL statement that's embedded in the C# is insert into person. So that's insert into the table person. And then the field names, which exist in the table, which is first name, last name, age, written as shown. And then you have to say values, and then you have to give it the variables that you're going to be passing. So I'm just going to be passing it the arguments that were sent in the insert data function when that was called. Again, I'm not going over the SQL part because this is not a SQL video. So hopefully you understand that part. I'm just going over how to connect and talk to the SQLite. Okay, now this APOST function that you see here, I always check for apostrophes. So I have a separate little function here, and all I do is replace, if I see an apostrophe, I replace it with 2, and then that tells pretty much any SQL database that it's an apostrophe. Apostrophes have to be handled in your databases, otherwise they'll cause problems. So I run that little function on an insert and also in an update statement prior to sending it the information that was sent. That way the user knows what's going on. So the user calls this function, insert data, passes it these arguments. These arguments are then fed into an embedded SQL statement right here. And then the SQLite command is here just like it was before for the query, except for in this case we're not using the reader, we're using the SQL create command. And we're still using the text we created up here. And this time we're going to do an execute non-query. Execute non-query just means it's not a select statement. It might be an insert or an update or a delete. Excuse me. And then here I'll say, okay, insert completed successfully, just so that you know it's been done. And if this fails, if something goes wrong, then I want to catch the exception. I want to say where this exception happened. It happened in the database SQLite class and in the insert data function. And then I want to know what the error was. That's it. I'm going to return one of these two messages, either finished nicely or there's an error, and that's what's going to happen. Again, this written down here is just a maintenance one, just to clean up the apostrophes, and that's done. That's called right here when the string is concatenated and constructed. Okay, so then all I need to do is go back to the programs and call it. So in the programs back in the main, I create my SQL connection by calling the create connection, which we already went over, and then once I have that, the actual path and the connection string, which is done right here in this chunk of code here, once that happens and I have it, then I'm going to, in this case I'm going to do an insert. So I call the database class, I do the insert data, and I give it some information. Bobby, Chapa, 28. I know I'm not 28, but I use 28 because that was my favorite age, and I pass it the connection string. And now this will be in the database. And then the next thing I do is I call the console and I say, okay, now do that select statement and tell me what's in the database. So this should be retrieved from the database. That's what should happen here. Obviously, if you were making this for real and you want to do a good job, you would have somebody enter this into the console. You would use a console read and a console write in order to get this information into the database as the user inputs it. But for our demo purposes, I'm just hard coding this, just again to emphasize the demonstration of speaking to the database. Okay, so let's do our Control F. and I've entered this twice now. So there it is in the database, and this select statement is what's actually writing to the console and pulling it out. So let's throw something else in there. We'll put my wife's name in, Sarah, and run that one. Okay, and now this comes out of the database. We're starting to collect information in our database. Okay, that concludes the demonstration on how to write to the database, how to enter items into the database, how to connect to it. This is all for SQLite. And and then the really nice part about all of this is that I can, well, let's close the solution here. If I close the solution and let me go back to, one moment, I'll get so the exciting part about this, and what I really like about this, is that this is the solution directory here, and in it, of course, you have your usual files. But now here's this DB directory that I created, and with our little testing database. And now it doesn't matter. This whole thing is portable now. So if I take this, I can throw it on my USB drive. I can upload it. I can copy this over to my, on my USB. I could take it to the lab, plug it into my lab, and I could work on it. I could write code and continue to write select statements. I could finish this. I could do the insert statement, the update statement. Oh, I did the insert, the update statement, the delete statement. I could put validation. I could put where the user inputs it. You're doing the console read. You could do all that stuff without having to worry about any more of this, without any configuration. It's just all portable, and that's really exciting to me, and very helpful for students that are learning how to use databases. You can't really work with the database itself, so if you need to alter some tables or change some field names and all that, you still would have to go back to your main system or download the DB browser in order to work with that. But everything else, though, entering data and pulling data and all the stuff that you want to do, concentrating on your actual coding, all that can be done, and the whole thing is portable. Okay, so that concludes this lesson. I don't want to talk any longer about it because I'm already at 42 minutes, and I hope this was helpful. If you guys want me to do any more demos with it, finish the functions, whatever, just let me know. Have a great day.